Go. Hello. Looks like we're working. There we go. Some minor technology difficulties here. I think we got it sorted.
Hey, David, it's Caitlin. I'm the librarian hostess tonight.
There we go. Nice to meet you. Actually, I'm Sean.
Sean, hi.
I work for David, actually. He's at another board meeting related deal tonight, but I've got all the fossils with me.
Awesome. Well, if you need any help, I will probably do a little couple-minute just welcome to everybody at 6, and then maybe a little wrap up at the end. But then in the meantime, I don't know, we talked to David about the possibility, oops, sorry, this is my dinosaur, about the possibility of making the librarian kind of on duty as possibly a co-host, so that way we can help kind of just step in to like mute or turn off video for anybody after you've already gotten started, so you don't have to kind of interrupt the flow of things. I don't know if that's something you are able to do or would like to do, but
that would work fine for me. I have to admit my my area of expertise is in the Stone Age, so
one of the things you can do is after you've kind of gotten started with everything is you can pull up your list of participants, and when you run your cursor over me, there's a little more option, and that's where you can make me the host. And then from that point on, you can just do your thing, and I can be the one like answering questions in chat or like helping people with technical stuff, turning off video, turning off audio. And then I can give the controls back to you at the end, so that way you can stop the whole thing when you're done.
That'll work. Looks like I've got it right here.
Oh, yep, I'm the host now. Yep, so I can go ahead and I can stop people's video. And yep, we'll just let some more people get in. But yeah, I'll wait till, I guess it is 6 now.
Yep, that was my 6 o'clock alarm. So
6 o'clock, all right. Well, hello everybody. Welcome into Colossal Fossils, Tyrannosaurus Rex. It's our second session for week 1 of our whole Colossal Fossils series with the Bridges, Bridges library system. So I'm Miss Caitlin. I am the librarian at the Oconomowoc Public Library, just in case you don't know who I am. And I also am co-hosting with librarians at Sussex and at Jefferson, I think. Neither here nor there. So welcome in, everybody. Just a couple things before we get started. We are going to turn off people's video, and we are going to keep you muted just so we can kind of keep everything focused on our host, Sean. Hi, Sean.
Hello.
And if you have any questions, feel free to throw them into the chat, and I'll try to answer them as the best as I can, or maybe pass those along to Sean at the very, very end. We can open it up for some questions, okay? So just kind of keeping that in mind that yes, we're going to keep our video off, we're going to keep our audio off, but if you're having any technical difficulties or kind of want to throw any questions into chat, either for me to answer or probably more for Sean to answer, we'll get to that at the end of the presentation, okay? So this is just kind of a time for you to sit back and enjoy and learn a whole ton about the T-Rex. And just a reminder that if you have this link for the Thursday programs, that works for any of the Thursday night programs in this series, okay? So that means you can join us next week when we're doing, is it Ice Age?
I believe next week is Predators and Prey.
Predators and Prey, and then the next one I think is Ice Age.
Yep.
And then the week after that is Women in Science. So again, this link that you had to get into tonight's program is good for those Thursday night programs as well. If you needed to switch and do one of the Tuesday programs, In that case, you would probably want to reach back out to your home library and get registered for those Tuesday evenings so they can get you the link for that, okay? But otherwise, the link you have tonight is good for all the Thursday programs that you can attend at 6 p.m. for the next 3 weeks after this one. Whoa, so many fun things to learn about with paleontology. And I think that is it for housekeeping. So I'll go ahead and I will turn it over to Sean.
All right. So, well, first off, hello, everybody. Thank you for joining me here at Colossal Fossils in Wausau. As she said, next week, we're going to be talking about predators and prey. This week, we're talking about T-Rex and this big beefy guy behind me, Triceratops, along with several other late Cretaceous dinosaurs. So before we get into that, my name is Sean, Cave Sean Works. I am the mammoth hunter. What I do for the museum is what we call experimental archaeology. It's a really fun little thing, but I focus on artifacts from human ancestors. Today, we're going way farther back in time than I usually do. It's going to be a lot of fun. I've got a lot of really cool fossils to show you. And we're going to make sure, I've actually got a reminder alarm set here so that I don't talk too much. We are going to have time at the end for questions, so I'll make sure to get everybody's questions answered. Now, for starters, with dinosaurs. All dinosaurs existed in a time period called the Mesozoic. Mesozoic is a massive length of time. Now, it started about 250 million years ago and ran all the way up to the end of the dinosaurs, right about 65, almost 66 million years ago. Now, just to put that in perspective, that is 150 million years that dinosaurs of some kind or another were wandering around. Our earliest ancestors only go back a little bit more than 300,000 years. So dinosaurs were around for way longer than we have been. Now, the Mesozoic period is, it's a geological measurement. It's basically, it's a way we date how old rocks are. It's broken up into 3 separate sections. The first one is the Triassic. That's when we first start to see dinosaurs. We've still got a lot of really weird, gnarly animals, mammal-like reptiles, giant land crocodiles that are kind of like dinosaurs in their own way. The very earliest pterosaurs, flying reptiles, and of course the very earliest marine reptiles. Now, next is the Jurassic, and of course that makes you think of things like Jurassic Park, right? But the Jurassic period is when we start to see some of the real iconic big dinosaur species. Things like Stegosaurus with its spiked tail and big, huge plates on its back, which you're going to get to see some Stegosaurus next week. It's one of my favorites. Things like Apatosaurus and Brachiosaurus, the long-necked, giraffe-like herbivores that we think of. And the Jurassic also starts to bring us some of the big, really, truly massive super predators. Things like Allosaurus or Megalosaurus, which, by the way, Megalosaurus was one of the first dinosaurs ever described by science. The very earliest reconstructions, they make it look like a giant, chunky lizard. It's pretty funny looking. You look up drawings or paintings, sculptures from Crystal Garden of Megalosaurus. You'll get a laugh. Really fat. The last time period is the Cretaceous period, or the last section, rather, is the Cretaceous period. Cretaceous period started around 90 million years ago, went right up to the end of the dinosaurs. And the Cretaceous period contains most of our Jurassic Park type dinosaurs. The mosasaur, that giant marine reptile that jumps out of the water and grabs the shark. Things like Pteranodon or Quetzalcoatlus, these gigantic flying pterosaurs, some of them as big as airplanes. And our typical dinosaurs, the raptors. Like this one is Utah raptor. This is basically your Jurassic Park Velociraptor. Just for comparison here, that is the size of my hand. And it would have been longer in life. It would have been covered with a hard shell. Made of stuff called keratin, kind of like your fingernails. Now, we also had, at the end of the Cretaceous, a lot of things that are very familiar to us today. A lot of the plants that were appearing at this time are things that we would recognize. Things like the first flowering plants evolved during the Cretaceous. And we actually think that the first flowering plants evolved as a way for plants to breed faster because of how quickly dinosaurs were eating them. Now, we would also see at the very end of the Cretaceous, the very first fossils of ancestral grass. But at this time, the great fields, prairies, and savannas of the Cretaceous, they weren't covered in grass. They were covered in another plant that you're probably familiar with, called ferns. Now, this is a fossil leaf from the same rock formation, the same area as our Triceratops. And plants like these, tree ferns would have looked a lot like palm trees, or ferns like what we would see in, well, if I go out into the woods around here during the summertime, just modern ferns. You might even have a parent or a grandparent who has a fern as a potted plant at home. Those were what covered the prairies and the savannas at this time. And a really neat kind of tree called a cycad basically looks like a gigantic pineapple. And we can still find those today in a couple of places, but they're pretty rare. Of course, birds. By the time Triceratops was flying around, we had essentially modern birds, beaks, gripping feet, and feathers. They're about the size of sparrows. Because we had flowers, we had the first pollinator insects, things like bees and butterflies, moths, of course, cockroaches and worms, all that sort of thing. And turtles, lizards, snakes, frogs were all already around 65 million years ago at the end of the Cretaceous. Of course, crocodiles. Now, crocodiles today are pretty impressive animals. If you think about, say, Nile crocodiles, when we see videos of zebra and wildebeest crossing rivers, you get these 25-foot-long gigantic crocodiles going after these animals. This is a tooth from a Deinosuchus. Now, Deinosuchus is a late Cretaceous crocodile. It is a little bit longer than T-Rex, about 50 feet when it was fully grown. So that's the length of a school bus plus the length of a big pickup truck. It was a massive animal, upwards of 6 tons. And like modern crocodiles, the tooth, it's very thick, very rounded in shape, but it's much, much bigger. These crocodiles were easily twice the size of a large modern crocodile, and they had serrated teeth like sharks. So they weren't just good at grabbing on, but they were really good at cutting out big chunks of meat. This would have actually been a dinosaur predator. It would have given poor T-Rex a run for its money if he went swimming in the wrong watering hole. Now, of course, at the end of the Cretaceous period, we still have dinosaurs. I'm seeing from some people's favorite dinosaurs, you're in the right period. Now, the first Cretaceous dinosaur we're going to talk about would have been a really tough nut to crack for Tyrannosaurus rex. So this is a type of Ankylosaurus. Now this little toy here is just so that I can make sure everybody knows what kind of dinosaur I'm talking about. It's not the best model. I wasn't able to find a really good one for today, but it shows really well the features of these animals. Now, ankylosaurs were the armored dinosaurs, kind of like spiky armadillos, except it was 20 feet long, probably longer than your living rooms are. Now, an animal like this at full size would have weighed about 4 tons, and it was covered in armor and spikes from head to tail. In fact, it was so heavily armored, even its eyelids had armor plating. And on the tail, it has bone, a big lump of bone in the shape of a club about the size of a basketball. An animal like this, even though it was less than half the size of a T-Rex, it would have been very difficult for a Rex to get a bite out of this. Now, it's really neat. A few years ago in Canada, some miners actually found a skeleton, or rather a mummy, not just a skeleton, but a complete fossil of an ankylosaur called Nodosaurus. Now, it is the most perfectly preserved and complete dinosaur ever found. It has skin, it has muscle, it has stomach contents, it has every single armor plate with almost no warping or squishing from being buried underground for millions and millions of years. So we know exactly what that dinosaur looked like. And it was a very close relative of this guy. Now, if you want to look that up at some point, we don't have any Nodosaur fossils just yet. Maybe next summer, hopefully. Nodosaur is N-O-D-O-S-A-U-R. And if you look up Nodosaur mummy, you'll see photos of this animal. It is amazing. Now, alongside the Nodosaurs, one you'll recognize from Jurassic Park is the Pachycephalosaurus. And we can kind of think of those as a late Cretaceous goat. I'm sure they would have been on the menu for T-Rex. What's neat about Pachycephalosaurus is that most dinosaurs, T-Rex for example, their vertebrae line up lengthwise. So their neck has kind of an S-curve. Think like the same way a lizard or a snake, their neck and skull comes together. Pachycephalosaurus had a neck bone that attached to the base of its skull like people. What that means is that when they lowered their head down, it put their entire spinal column from tail, back, neck, to the base of the skull in a perfectly straight line and made them a living battering ram. The rounded dome heads, the tops of their skulls, could be up to 10 inches thick. So like that. And the animal themselves are only about 15 feet long, about the length of a car, maybe 1,000 pounds. So that's actually thicker bone on the top of their skull than pretty much any living animal that bashes their heads together today. Now, in massive herds, walking right alongside our Triceratops here, we had hadrosaurs. We can kind of think of hadrosaurs as being like the Cretaceous version of a cow. They look like this guy here. Unlike our ankylosaur, this is just a little bit of a model so I can show you which ones we're talking about. The hadrosaurs, or the duck-billed dinosaurs, were very, very common. Some species got to be as large as T-Rex, up to about 45 feet long and 6, 7, 8 tons. They ate an incredible amount of vegetation. And we know from trackways and from nest sites that they lived in groups. They traveled and moved in herds, and we actually believe that they migrated. There's a trackway actually in England of an early relative called Iguanodon that shows they seem to be migrating along the shoreline of the beach. They were walking along the coast. Now, these hadrosaurs, we know from several fossils that Tyrannosaurus rex preyed on them. There is a fossil of an Edmontosaur that was found where its tail, right about here, got bitten by a T-Rex, actually so hard the T-Rex took a chunk of bone and flesh and meat off the back of its tail, but it escaped that attack and the bone healed. It lived, which is fortunate because wherever it went after it escaped, it ended up being fossilized so we could find it. More recently, another dinosaur mummy of a hadrosaur found again in Canada had a bite mark from what's called a Daspletosaurus, a small relative of T-Rex, where it bit the hadrosaur on the side, knocked it into the water, the hadrosaur floated away and ended up getting fossilized. And we got a lot of skin and muscle and the bite mark from the Daspletosaur on that fossil. So we know that was an important food source for our Tyrannosaurids. Now, last but not least, we have the ceratopsians. The ceratopsians is the family group that includes our Triceratops back here. And we're going to talk about an ancestor of Triceratops that's in this same family group next week, but I'm going to give you a little sneak preview with Sarah here because, well, if you'll allow me to step back from the camera for a moment, I'm about 5.5 feet tall. That Triceratops skull, just the skull, is bigger than I am. So we're going to use its ancestor to show you a couple of features about our Triceratops because it's just a little too big for me to pick up and put in front of the camera. Now, this is not a contemporary with T-Rex. This is Protoceratops. It is an ancestor of our Triceratops and actually an ancestor of all of the ceratopsians. And it's got all of the defining features of that group, but it's about the size of a sheep instead of the size of an elephant. Now, first off, we've got this big bony frill on the back here, and this does a couple of things. It makes it look really big and intimidating. It's good for display. We think it was probably brightly colored. 2, it provides a little bit of protection for the neck because it's kind of like a shield. Now you'll notice on the Triceratops behind me, it's much flatter. It provides much more protection. On Protoceratops, it's much more to look impressive. The Triceratops behind me, this frill is solid bone. On Sarah, and actually most of the ceratopsians, they have holes in there. Now those holes weren't chewed out by a predator, they hatched with those, and that is where muscles attached to this frill, and those muscles anchor the lower jaw. What that tells us is that these guys had a really strong bite, and actually they would have had cheeks in life, so you'd only see the beak like that. It would look a lot like a parrot or a parakeet. Now, you can see behind the cheeks, we've got chewing teeth, just like modern mammals, our ceratopsians. And in fact, our hadrosaurs and ankylosaurs were all chewing their food. Older plant eaters, many of whom we'll talk about next week, they didn't chew their food, they just swallowed it, which is actually how birds do it today. So these guys were really well adapted to grazing, just like modern mammals. Now, another thing, you look at that beak, you look at the mouth on Sarah here, the teeth are together, but the beak doesn't touch. And that's because the bone is not the full size of that beak. In life, it would have been covered with a hard keratin shell. A keratin is what your fingernails are made of. And so that would have made it longer, probably a little more hooked, and a lot sharper. Now, she really would have looked like a parrot in life. But a real important detail of this beak is that it's narrow from top to bottom. Now, at the end of the Cretaceous, there were herds of animals like this Triceratops. There were massive herds of the hadrosaurs, and there were large numbers of some of the other herbivores we talked about, and they all ate a lot of food. An animal like this would probably have to eat more than a half ton every day just to keep itself moving, roughly equivalent to a modern elephant. And the way they did that without competing for the same food so that different herds, different species could actually live next to each other, like zebras and wildebeest, antelopes, and buffaloes do in the African savanna today, is that they had different adaptations. So we'll take a look here. Our ankylosaur, he has short stubby legs and a really wide mouth. He eats coarse woody plants near to the ground. Our hadrosaur has a wide bill like a duck, which is why we call them duck bills. And they're grazing a little higher up and softer plants, like the ferns, like I talked about as potted plants. Our Triceratops and the ceratopsians here all have a very narrow snout. And what that allows them to do is be picky eaters. They can push their beak in between bunches of plants and leaves and pick out specific shoots and branches, maybe even fruits or flowers or nuts that look like the food they'd want to eat. And so we think that a hadrosaur, an ankylosaur, and a triceratops could all sit next to each other and eat without competing with one another, which is probably why we were able to see such massive herds. On some burial sites of, say, our triceratops here, it looks like we had whole herds get caught in a flood while crossing a river, which sometimes happens to modern day mammals in Africa, for example. If they're crossing rivers where the crocodiles are coming after them and the herd's all pushing into the water at once, you'll get a lot of animals that drown. When that happened in the Cretaceous on a few occasions, we got animals that, well, they floated downriver and they got fossilized. So one of those formations in particular actually gives us our triceratops here. Now, in the movies, things like Jurassic Park or Land Before Time, for when I was a little tyke, Hollywood always likes to show us triceratops as being like a buffalo, right? They're like a bison. It's got these massive, huge horns and that big frill. It's a huge animal. And in the movies, it looks great if they have that just charging straight forward and slamming its head into, say, T-Rex. But in real life, Triceratops was a way more interesting fighter. Triceratops was more like a sword fighter, like a medieval knight. So if you look over my shoulder here, right here at the base of the neck, where are we? There we go. At the base of the neck, where the neck and the skull attach, Triceratops has a very special joint. And now, like on our necks, people's necks, people's vertebra turns really well side to side so we can look around. But if we move our heads up and down, we actually have to move our entire neck. Well, Triceratops, its neck bones over here are actually fused together and solid with muscle attachment. Its neck joint works like our shoulder. But what this allows it to do is move its head around in any direction. More than that, that big, heavy bone crest is the same weight as the lower half of the head, so that center of gravity, the balance point of this animal's skull, is right where that ball and socket joint is. So as far as the neck muscles are concerned, the head is very, very light, and it can quickly and easily wave those horns around and face its head in any direction. What's more, if I move your view over here, take a look at the front legs. Now, Triceratops' front legs, if I stand up straight here, it's only about chest high on me. Its back legs are about 7 feet tall. So almost twice as long as its front legs. What that means is to run forward, to charge like it does in the movies, its front legs have to move twice as fast as its back legs. Otherwise, that big, huge head will fall forward into the ground and he'd get his horns stuck. But these limbs are massive. When fully muscled, the front legs would be as big around as I am. And unlike modern mammals that hold their legs directly under, Ceratopsians' legs were always in kind of like a 3/4 push-up. They were a little splayed out to the side. So we think they were probably slow runners, but they were very agile. So if we imagine a T-Rex going after a Triceratops, the Triceratops, it's not going to look at that T-Rex and charge at it straight on like a rhinoceros. It's actually going to stand its ground. It's going to wait for that T-Rex to come up to it. And at the last second, it's going to feint to one side or another. Imagine like a basketball player trying to dodge somebody from the other team. And then it's going to swivel that head and lunge and try to thrust with those horns. fight's going to look more like this, where you have a really hungry T-Rex that just can't quite get a bite. And those horns in life are even bigger than they look right here for the same reason as the Protoceratops beak. So this is another Triceratops horn. And you can see it matches pretty well. But we can see a really neat detail on this one. This ridge, this line right here, is the edge of where that keratin covering would be covering over the entire length of this horn. It would make it a few inches longer, very sharp, and it would actually reinforce and strengthen the bone. You can see on this particular fossil, this is the eye socket right here. And below that would have been skin. Now, you can imagine, like I said, the Triceratops swiveling these horns from side to side, and when the T-Rex gets close, pushing with its back legs to try and stab with these giant spikes. Now, if our Triceratops was a little bit on the unlucky side and the T-Rex got past those huge horns and that massive neck frill, it wasn't completely out of luck. This really neat fossil is a piece of Triceratops skin. Now, if we take a close look, you can see each one of these little bumps is actually a scale. Now, they're a little different from modern reptile scales. There are many things like snakes, for example, where the scales overlap. Their skin, the texture of it would have been kind of like a Komodo dragon, sort of pebbly, where each one of these little scales is like a bead of bone that sits in the skin, and they're next to each other instead of overlapping. Now, this piece would have come from right about here on the Triceratops, kind of behind and a little toward the belly, behind his front leg. Further up on the back, when we found samples of Triceratops skin, we know that they had bony scutes, sort of big lumps of bone armor, like the backs of crocodiles, that ran along the spine or along the length. So for a T-Rex to get a bite in there, you'd have to watch his teeth. And of course, our Triceratops could swivel around really quickly and face him if that T-Rex was trying to get behind. Now, we do know beyond all doubt that T-Rex did occasionally, at least, get himself a Triceratops. Now, this next fossil, I'm going to have to step back a little bit. It's pretty big and pretty heavy, but it's a really neat fossil. This is a Triceratops leg bone. We call it the T-Rex biscuit. Now, this would have been an upper leg, a thigh. There we go. You can see it's more than half as long as I am tall. If we take a close look at this end, you might notice there's a couple of holes in that leg bone. We rotate it over to this side. There's a few more. Those holes are from Tyrannosaurus rex teeth. In fact, the shape of a T-Rex tooth fits perfectly in those holes. And what's more, on this side, we can see all these little holes, these little pock marks on the bone. Those are from another, probably young T-Rex, chewing on the end of this bone. the theory is that Mama T-Rex bit down on this side of the bone and held it while the little babies chewed on the bone, kind of like puppies do today. Boy, that thing's heavy. Now, T-Rex was the last in a long line of carnivorous dinosaurs. Now, when it was first discovered, we really didn't understand where it came from. It was just sort of all of a sudden, there's this massive predator that we know about. But now, thanks to recent discoveries that actually come out of China, where we've gotten some really fascinating fossils and some really neat new dinosaurs, several of which we're going to talk about next week. We found an early T-Rex ancestor called Eutyrannus. Now, Eutyrannus it's kind of neat. It's so old that it actually looks almost more like a big raptor than like a T-Rex. It looked like this guy here. There's a couple of important details that we discovered about Eutyrannus. Now, its skull and its teeth are pure T-Rex. It's got a strong bite, really, really thick, really, really powerful teeth. But its arms are a little bit longer. It has 3-fingered hands, well-developed fingers and claws. And you may notice from our little model here, Eutyrannus was covered in feathers. When the fossil was found, they were very careful digging it up, and they actually found impressions of where the animal had fallen down in the mud before it got buried over to be fossilized, and it had stamped basically a full body impression of the animal that preserved. And that thing had feathers over just about every square inch of its body. It looked more like a chicken with hands than it did like a Jurassic Park T-Rex. But it was already kind of a big animal. Its ancestors, the couple of animals that we found that are even older, are smaller, sort of velociraptor sized. By the time we get to Eutyrannus, we're talking 25 feet long, about a ton, and probably fast. But as I said, still covered in feathers. And unlike feathers like we'd think of on, say, like a goose, the feathers on this looked more like a cassowary or like a kiwi, a big ground bird. They almost had a kind of a shaggy, furry look to them. Now, moving forward a little ways, Eutyrannus spread all over Asia and North America. It developed into more than a dozen different species, including Tarbosaurus, Daspletosaurus, and Albertosaurus, and of course, T-Rex. Now, this took millions and millions of years. Now, before we get to T-Rex himself, one of his ancestors, his predecessor, that came just a little earlier than T-Rex in the late Cretaceous, is an important member of the T-Rex family called Albertosaurus. Now, Albertosaurus is important to us because we have more and better preserved Albertosaurus skeletons than we do Tyrannosaurus skeletons. Now, up until recently, in fact, it was a find in Canada, in Alberta, where we found more than a dozen of these Tyrannosaurids, these Albertosaurs, all buried together in a group. Young, kind of teenage, sub-adults, and a couple of full-grown adult individuals, all buried together. And at first, we actually thought this was a predator trap, which is sort of like a quicksand pit or a mud pit or even like a tar pit, something where an animal gets stuck and it can't get out. It makes a struggle. And carnivores, they hear this struggle. They think it's going to be easy to get this animal as a meal. They go out to get a bite to eat, and they get stuck themselves. Well, it turns out there was no other animals caught in with this group. It was just Albertosaurus. And they were all buried in the same strata, the same layer of rock. So as of right now, we think that it was actually a group that all got caught in a flash flood and buried and fossilized together. From this group, Albertosaurus is going to give us a hand with the next fossil. This is an Albertosaurus hand. Now, what's important about this, I know, terrible joke, right? What's important about this is that prior to just a couple of years ago, we really didn't have a good hand and arm fossil of T-Rex. But because of the Albertosaurus fossils that we found, we have a pretty good idea of how the hands and arms were put together. The first thing that we notice is this little bone spur here. That's called a vestigial digit. A digit like a finger. This is actually a thumb bone. And vestigial means that it hasn't been used by these animals for such a long time that they basically stopped growing it. When this animal was alive, that would have been covered over, and you would only just see the two fingers of like a standard T-Rex. You might see a little bump like on your wrist bone there, where this vestigial thumb is. So Albertosaurus already had the two Tyrannosaurus rex fingers, this sort of defining feature of T-Rex. Now, another neat thing, the Albertosaurus hand and lower arm to the elbow and the upper arm, if we had it, are almost exactly the same length as my arm. But Albertosaurus is more than 30 feet long, longer than a school bus, which means it had pretty tiny arms. Tyrannosaurus had the same size arms, even though it was another 10 to 15 feet longer. So what that means, if all of you watching me at home had arms proportionally the same size as a Tyrannosaurus rex, you would be walking around with arms the length of your pointer finger. It'd be really hard to type on the computer. But despite that small size, the Tyrannosaurids, Albertosaurus T-Rex, they used their arms. Now, I like to think I'm a fairly strong guy. I can deadlift about 30 pounds. That's just take one hand, pick up a 30-pound weight, and just lift it up. I think that's pretty good for me personally. Tyrannosaurus rex had very powerfully muscled arms. These bones and the muscle attachment points on the claws and all along here where ligaments, tendons, and muscle attached were very, very strong, reinforced, and highly developed, which tells us not only were they very strong, but we estimate that a Tyrannosaurus rex with a single arm could deadlift 400 pounds. That is more than two of me. It's way better than I can ever hope to do with a single arm lift. So we know because of that these animals used these arms. The claws are sharp, curved hooks, just like eagle talons. The muscles and the bones are strong and well developed. Other carnivorous dinosaurs, things like Carnotaurus, that had very short arms, their arms were very, very underdeveloped, very poorly muscled. We don't think they used them. They just kind of hung there. T-Rex was definitely using its arms. Maybe one of you watching will go on to become the paleontologist who finally figures out what they used their arms for, that they needed them to be that strong. If you do, I want to know the answer. Now, one more little detail on Albertosaurus here. I want to show you. Remember, our T-Rex tooth is a big tooth. Albertosaurus, his teeth were almost more like a ripsaw or like shark teeth. They were a little thinner, serrated and sharp. They were still thick enough that we think Albertosaurus had a really strong bite, which is kind of a hallmark of T-Rex. But Albertosaurus, it seems to be more of a meat biter than a bone cruncher. And they actually had proportionally very long legs, and we think they were fairly fast runners. A neat little detail, if we had the rest of the Albertosaurus skull here, right about here, they have little horns, two little spikes in front of their eyes, which we think were for display to other Albertosaurus. We don't think it was for ramming into stuff. They were little tiny flanges, probably brightly colored. Now, I've got a really, really neat trace fossil to show you here. Our first real direct T-Rex fossil. Now, it's a big, heavy fossil, so give me just a second, but I promise it's worth it. This right here is a Tyrannosaurus Rex footprint. As you can see, it's big enough that I could just about sit down in this footprint. This was a huge animal. If I made a footprint in the same mud that this T-Rex was walking in to make this footprint, my footprint would probably be about a ½ inch or maybe an inch deep. This footprint is about 8 inches deep. This was a very big animal. And we know from the couple of other tracks that were found along with this one, that this animal, he was probably walking along the shoreline of a watering hole, and he left a few footprints in the mud, probably stopped to get a drink, and then wandered back to wherever he was going to spend the rest of his day. Thanks to a, well, if you get into trigonometry, an interesting formula called the Alexander formula, we can actually figure out how quickly this animal was moving. I would figure it was ambling along at about 3 miles per hour. It wasn't going very quickly. But if you're a T-Rex, you don't have to be in a hurry, right? Now, yeah, that's really heavy. I'm gonna prop that there for a second. Now, by comparison, dinosaur trackways from the ostrich dinosaurs, things like the Gallimimus that we see in Jurassic Park, these guys, have actually shown that they could trot along, there we go, could trot along at about 35 miles per hour. So right about the same speed as modern day ostriches. As far as I know, that's actually the fastest that we've seen any dinosaur tracks. But it's really hard to tell from just the fossils how quickly they were going. Now, a neat detail, I can lift this back up. We look at the toe there, you can actually see where the claw squished into the mud as he picked his foot up and left a scrape in the toe there. All right. I'm going to show you a much smaller fossil now. Now, what we call trace fossils, things like footprints or impressions in the mud, say where something sat down or did something while it was alive, are really, really neat, really important discoveries, because footprints like a Tyrannosaurus Rex trackway can tell us behavior. It directly demonstrates to us something that this animal was doing while it was alive, as opposed to the bones where we kind of have to fill in the blanks. Now, these are a really neat example of that. They're from a different dinosaur, but I like to show this with the track. You'll notice they're not a complete footprint. Believe it or not, what these are toe marks scratching in the mud as a dinosaur that was swimming comes ashore. And this is the marks in the mud on the bottom of a pond or a river where its toes were just able to touch the bottom as it's swimming up to the shore, and it left little scratch marks. Further up the trackway, they turn into full footprints and gradually show deeper impressions where he got heavier as he got out of the water. Trace fossils that show us direct proof that at least some dinosaurs could swim, which doesn't seem like it would be that important, but up until fossils like this, scientists actually thought that dinosaurs wouldn't be able to swim. Now, next, I have a little model here. I want to show you the face of T-Rex. T-Rex has some really neat features that we can see on this that are kind of important. In Jurassic Park, if you hold still, if you freeze, T-Rex can't see you. In real life, that's not true. Tyrannosaurus' brain was really well developed in the sensory areas. It had an incredibly huge olfactory bulb, which is the part of the brain that determines what it's smelling. We think that T-Rex actually had the best sense of smell of just about any animal that's ever lived. The only modern comparable species is the turkey vulture, and that can scent food up to 10 miles away from several thousand feet up into the air. Next, unlike a lot of carnivorous dinosaurs, including raptors, T-Rex has forward-facing eyes. Its eye sockets were here and here, and the shape of its snout allows it to see directly forward, just like us, or like cats or wolves or bears today, which means when it's looking at something, it's focused on it. It also had ridges of bone behind the ears, so it essentially had ears. Not quite like mammals do today, but when it was looking forward, all of its senses, hearing, smell, sight, were focused. Now, if any of you do a Thanksgiving turkey, you'll find this next one kind of interesting. This is my second favorite T-Rex bone here. This is a Tyrannosaurus rex wishbone. Now, what makes this important as a detail is that there's only two groups of animals that have a wishbone: modern birds and carnivorous dinosaurs. Things like the raptors and the T-Rexes have this bone, what we call a furcula. And it sits right about here. It's where the collarbones, where the bones in the shoulder, have fused together into a solid piece, and they allow muscle attachment in birds for flapping their wings. Now, just for comparison, this looks like a big wishbone compared to a turkey. But if you had a turkey that was 40 feet long and weighed 8 tons, its wishbone would be bigger than I am. So T-Rex, tiny little arms, tiny little wishbone. Now, last but not least, my favorite T-Rex fossil in the entire museum. This is Stan. Well, at least part of Stan. Now this is the lower jaw of a nearly full-grown Tyrannosaurus rex. It's not quite full size, but it's got a couple of neat features. It can tell us some really cool things about T-Rex. First off, if you watch Jurassic Park, T-Rex is always walking around with its teeth hanging out like this. Now, I know some of you at home probably walk around with your teeth hanging out all day, just like the Jurassic Park T-Rex. But Stan, our real-life T-Rex, had lips. These bumps, these pits in the bone, are muscle attachment and nerve attachment for lips. So when T-Rex closed its mouth, it closed it all the way, just like you or I or modern lizards do. T-Rex might actually have been able to look at you and think you're too small to eat and go. Another neat thing, we flip this around. Since teeth brushes weren't invented yet, tyrannosaurs never brushed their teeth. Instead, they grew in a new tooth. About every 6 weeks, one of these teeth would be replaced. So over about 2 years, T-Rex would replace all of its 40+ teeth. Gets a new smile every couple of years. And the neatest thing about Stan's jaw here just like us, this big fella was not born, he didn't hatch with holes in his jawbone. These holes came from another T-Rex. Stan and this Tyrannosaur got into a fight, and he got bit on his lower jaw so hard that it penetrated, it punctured these teeth right into his jawbone. What we think happened was that they were in a dispute over something, or we don't know what, and this other T-Rex tried to bite him on the neck. He stepped back, it caught him on the lower jaw, and then they started struggling, and its teeth gouged out big chunks of jawbone. Then Stan got away. We take a close look at these holes in the jawbone under a microscope, we can tell that they've healed somewhat. We think Stan was around for about 6 months after that fight with another Rex before he, got into another fight. Stan was kind of a troublemaker. This time, he got bit on the back of his head so hard that one of those giant teeth went into his brain and it killed him. But bad luck for Stan, good luck for us. That happened in a place where Stan was fossilized. So he could become one of the 12 or so Tyrannosaurus skeletons that we actually have a pretty good amount of, a pretty good record of. Now, I will say for the record, I highly recommend not solving disputes by biting people on the face. We see a lot of evidence of that in T-Rex, and well, they're not around anymore. Now, I know we're coming up on the end here. We've got about 5 or so minutes left. If there's any questions, be happy to answer them. If there's any of the fossils that I showed that you'd like a closer look at, I can do that too. I want to make sure we have time for everybody.
Sean, I called you Stan. Guess maybe that'd be a compliment. Sean, we did have one question in the chat that was asking if there were tornadoes in the dinosaur age. Is there much known about weather patterns?
Well, we can determine some things about weather patterns based on the types of animals and the types of plants that we find and comparing them to the modern world. I would say that it's a pretty good bet that tornadoes did occur because what causes tornadoes today are conditions that would have easily existed during the time of the dinosaurs. So they would have had tornadoes, hurricanes, thunderstorms, of course, droughts, depending on the period in time, even blizzards and snowstorms, just like we do today. And it would have varied dependent on where in the world they were. Where T-Rex was, kind of out on the Great Plains along the coast of the Great Inland Sea, they probably would have had hurricanes and tornadoes at least as often as we do today. And I saw a chat bubble. Was that, did I find the fossils? So I personally have not been on a dinosaur dig or a fossil dig with the museum. I have found some human artifacts and done some work with that. But all of our fossils, all of the replicas and the original pieces that we have are found and dug up by other folks. But one of these days, I would really like to go out west and find a T-Rex for myself. Then, T-Rex Sean could stand next to T-Rex Stan. It would be awesome.
Awesome. All right. Another question that came through was Bennett read that paleontologists think T-Rex was more of a scavenger than a hunter. What do you think?
So the scavenger hunter debate, we've kind of put that to rest now. That was originated by a paleontologist named Jack Horner. Jack Horner was famous for the discovery of the Maiasaur, which is one of those hadrosaur species that had huge nesting grounds. Now, he suggested because of the proportions of T-Rex, its short arms and its good sense of smell and so on, that it was probably what we call an obligate scavenger. That's like a vulture. Today, we've really pretty much left that theory behind. We think T-Rex like any modern predator, with a few exceptions, would happily scavenge because something that's dead doesn't fight back or try to stab you with big horns. But it was definitely an active predator. Because we found a couple of animals that, hadrosaurs in particular, that either survived a Tyrannosaurus attack or were killed by the T-Rex, by the wounds incurred from a Tyrannosaurus bite. Also, the forward-facing eyes and the forward-facing ears, the shape of its snout, like I talked about a little bit, those are features that we see in active predators today, things like bears, wolves, and lions. So if I was to bet, say if I was to go back in time and I had the choice of stay in a helicopter out of reach or stand on the ground in front of the T-Rex, I would stay in the helicopter. I'm pretty sure they were active predators.
Awesome. Thank you for clearing that up. We have a question asking, do you have a long-necked pliosaur? I'm going to guess maybe fossil is what they meant by that.
Well, we don't have the long-necked plesiosaur in the museum.
I was going to say, pardon my pronunciation.
No, that's okay. Well, there's pliosaur, plesiosaur, and elasmosaur. They're all kind of in the same family group. We have, and I can probably grab one of the fossils for next week's Predators and Prey. We do have some ancestors called nothosaurs, which they look very similar, except they don't have flippers yet. They still have feet.
Awesome. I think we have one last question here, and then we'll wrap up. Do you have many raptor fossils beside just the claw that you showed us?
Yes, we do. And next week, you're going to get to see the rest of them. We have a complete Velociraptor skeleton. And for close-up shots, a complete Velociraptor hind leg with toe claw. The Utah Raptor claw today was just to give you a little sneak peek for that. The Velociraptor was awesome.
Well, I am looking forward to next week then. And just a reminder to everybody, oh, sorry, that's my little saber tooth there. Just a reminder to everybody, again, that the link that you use to access the presentation tonight will work for you next week and for the coming weeks as well. So you can just reuse that link to join us in next week. I, for one, am super excited to see all those raptor fossils. That's going to be so much fun. And go ahead if you want to turn on your cameras and wave goodbye to Sean and give him a little thank you for presenting. This was so awesome.
That bubble. I did do the illustrations that we used today, yes.
Oh, Sean did do the illustrations. Awesome. An artist as well. All right.
Thank you all for coming.
Yeah, thank you for joining us, everybody. Sean, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to give you the host controls back. Right. And thanks, everybody. Have a fantastic week. And we'll see you again for Predators and Prey next week. Bye-bye.
See you next week.